Nick Shirley is doing what journalists should be doing, but are not doing. Because A, they are partisan political hacks who don't want to call out their side of the aisle, who don't want to bite the hand that feeds them, who don't want to burn bridges, have some negative reporting, and then get shut out of political invitations, access to government, and some just corrupt to the core. Would you ever expect CNN, MSNBC to delve into the fraud that's going on in Minnesota when their candidate was the running for vice president of the United States of America? Would they ever expose a fraud that would hurt their party to the core? The answer is no. They would work hand in hand to conceal it, exactly the same way they worked hand in hand to conceal Joe Biden's dementia. Objective, black on white dementia. They worked so hard to cover it until they could no longer cover it. I'm not going to pull up who's the guy that was alleged to have killed his intern, hit her on the head? Joe Scarborough. I'm not saying he did it. I'm saying it was an allegation on the internet. Scarborough. He's sharp as a tack. He's never been sharper. He's in the best shape of his life now. And then 3 months later, he's out of the race, give or take. The media worked hand in hand to cover up the Biden dementia because they couldn't admit it. It would cost them the election. And touch wood, or I should say, as karma would have it, it did cost them the election, but they will not expose fraud and corruption if they think it will hurt them. And the amazing thing is that now it's becoming increasingly clear that whatever coverage they did back in the day was, you want to talk about controlled opposition? It was controlled opposition. Whatever work the Biden DOJ, FBI did to prosecute those responsible for the multi-billion-dollar Somali fraud ring in Minnesota, whatever they did was controlled opposition damage control. Because many people don't realize they did prosecute 70 some odd people. They did put some people in jail. They didn't dismantle the sprawling fraud. They prosecuted, dare say, the bare minimum, and they certainly didn't put it on blast. And the media sure as hell didn't touch it with a 10-foot pole while Tampon Tim No Balls Walz was running as Kamala Harris's VP. The media didn't do its job. And as I predicted, by the way, what happened, although it's, again, human nature, not really much of a prediction, I said they're going to come after Nick Shirley. They're going to try to go after accuracies in the story. They're going to try to nitpick and pinpoint some things that might, in fact, be factually incorrect or even out of context. And they're going to try to use that to discredit all of Nick Shirley's journalism. They're going to try to do that to distract from the story of the fraud by going after the messenger. They're going to try to discredit the messenger to try to discredit or undermine or ignore the message. Now, I don't know who Andrew Mercado is. I think people did know who he was. I'm not familiar with everybody on the internet. Editor-in-chief at Mercado Media. He's a YouTube partner. I don't know if that just means he's monetized on YouTube. He's a Meta partner, U.S. Army veteran, Minnesotan. Well, he, in an attempt to discredit Nick Shirley's journalism. And by the way, the jealousy that you're going to see among people saying, hey, Nick Shirley didn't reveal anything. The media covered this 5 years ago. It's an amazing thing. The sucking and the blowing, the flipping and the flopping, the admitting, it's the celebration parallax. It's not happening, but the media reported on it happening 5 years before Nick Shirley. And this is just yet another Republican pounce story. Andrew Mercado, if you know who he is, let me know. I went back and reviewed Nick Shirley's video alongside photos from the actual locations. Once you line everything up, the story changes. At Quality Leering, sir, not Quality Learning. At Quality Leering Childcare, the hours posted right on the door, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's a child daycare that goes until 10 o'clock at night. There might be good reasons for that. In the video, the visit happens before 2 p.m. The sign is not shown. The camera lingers on a closed door, and viewers are left to assume that something is wrong. Something is wrong, Mercado. Later in that same video, the creator is inside a completely different building, the Griggs Midway building. The director screen is on camera. The directory screen is on camera, and it clearly shows the time is 2:33. The detail matters. It confirms the filming was happening throughout the afternoon, early afternoon. All right. Which means that the earlier closed visit was not evidence of fraud or a shell operation. It was evidence of someone showing up before business hours. These are different locations, but the same technique. Leave out hours, skip timestamps, let implication do the work. This is why timelines matter. This is why context matters. Once you remove those pieces, you are not investigating. You are shaping a narrative. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Credit to Destiny for catching this and laying out the timeline. So I said, You, by the way, no, what was even funny, we won't get to see it in here. Without getting to the punchline just yet, this is what Mercado replied to someone else in the very same thread to that tweet. Weird how Nick Shirley and all right-wing talking heads from Elon Musk to the vice president are saying nobody has ever reported on it except Nick. Now you're showing me a local news report from 6 years ago. That's crazy. It looks like they use credible sourcing in their reports. I actually had to have a fight with someone who's just, either too stupid or too dishonest for words. I don't know who it was. I say, paraphrasing, people have to, unless they want to be deliberately obtuse and say, he never said that. It's like, no, you idiots. This is paraphrasing in a humorous manner. The fraud is not happening, but local news already reported on the fraud 6 years ago is a hell of a position to take. And then I have to have a debate with someone as to where Mercado claimed that the fraud wasn't happening. Where does he say the fraud's not happening? So other than it's the entire gist of what he's saying, oh, we can't trust the reporting. It's narrative. It's not fraud. It's what do you say? This is what blah, blah, blah. Where was the part that I actually? Where was the part that I said here? These are different timestamps. Leave it. This is why when you remove the picture, you're not investigating. Where the hell did it? Oh, here we go. Sorry. It confirms the filming was happening throughout the early afternoon, which means the earlier closed visit was not evidence of fraud or a shell operation. So the earlier, not evidence of fraud. It is evidence of someone showing up before business opened. This is why timelines matter context. When you remove those pieces, you're not investigating, you're shaping a narrative. Let implication do the work. This is denial of the fraud, period. If you don't understand that that's what he's doing, you're an idiot. Talk about denial of implication. Let implication do the work. Oh, Nick Shirley was there before hours. What are you implying? That there's no fraud. But there's no fraud, except for the fact that media was reporting on it 5 years ago. But half-assed, right? Just the tip of the fraud. And it's the new line now. The fraud wasn't happening, but it's a Republicans pounce story. You got to love this. It's just the classic tactic. Instead of focusing on the egregiousness of the fraud, you focus on the reaction of your ideological adversaries, your political adversaries, to the egregiousness of the fraud. It's the Republicans pounce story. MAGA world zeroes in on Minnesota over fraud scandal. MAGA world zeroes in on Minnesota. You understand what they're doing right there. This is deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Darvo, narcissists, sociopaths, propagandists, liars. It's not the scandal that's the scandal, and it's not the scandal that's the story. It's how Republicans, as if Democrats should not be raging against this as well, it's how Republicans are reacting to the story that's the story. Let's hear how The Hill describes it. The Hill. MAGA world, zero. No, thank you. Listen to this. Allies of President Donald Trump have set their sights on Minnesota in the wake of the fraud scandal in the state. The scandal centers on hundreds of millions of dollars stolen via federally funded nutrition programs. Why the hell should Republicans not be pouncing right now? It's a Republican presidency. It's stolen government dollars that is now a Republican presidency of a government. Of course, better yet, I'm more freaked out at the fact that Democrats don't seem to be pouncing on this story. The New York Times late last month propelled the story into national prominence, noting federal prosecutor statements that as much as $1 billion might have been taken. You know who propelled it into national prominence? Nick Shirley. You jealous bastards. Jealousy will get you nowhere. Hold on, this is driving me crazy here. Sorry. OCD. To date, the FBI dismantled $250 million fraud, yada, yada, yada. The investigation exposed sham vendors, shell companies, and large-scale money laundering tied to the Feeding Our Future network, said Kash Patel. Case led to 78 indictments. All of this predated Kash Patel's tenure as director of the FBI. Abdel Noor was one in particular. We went over this the other day. Anyhow, Vice President Vance said in his own post on X that what's happening in Minnesota is a microcosm of the immigration fraud in our system. He's 100% right. Politicians like it because they get power. Welfare cheats like it because they get rich. But it's a zero-sum game, and they're stealing both money and political power from Minnesotans. He added, the Trump attack the Somalian. I just want you to remember this. Politicians like it because they get power. I told you that people were going to start going after Nick Shirley on a personal level, try to nitpick at facts or, certain details that they might very well have gotten wrong in the story in order to discredit the underlying story. And one thing I've always said, government is the blob. when it comes to giving itself more power, the more it screws up. So remember, the politicians like it because they get power. Your mismanagement of state funds has been exposed for tens of millions of Americans, yada, yada, yada. Emmer said, tech billionaire Elon Musk also weighed in. The radical left have been using fraudulent government programs for a long time to import and retain the vast numbers of illegals, in some cases illegal, whatever, immigrants to win elections. The more you look into it, you will be horrified your tax money is doing, in fact, yada, yada, yada. You know whose name? Did they mention Nick Shirley in this? Nick, can you imagine? The Hill wrote an entire article crediting the New York Times for putting this on blast and didn't once mention Nick Shirley. I said they're going to go after Nick Shirley. I said the government always uses this as an excuse to give itself more power. This was what I posted earlier. Exactly as predicted, what does the government do when its failures are exposed? It makes itself bigger. In response to the allegations of sweeping fraud in Minnesota, Walz spokesperson had this to say. Walz has, quote, hired an outside firm to audit payments to high-risk programs, shut down the Housing Stabilization Services program entirely, announced a new statewide program integrity director, and supported criminal prosecutions. Hey, Tim Walz, who's the outside firm you hired to do the audit? Who was the new statewide program integrity director? When did you hire that person? It wasn't only in December 2025, was it? Jail. You belong in jail. That's a screen grab from the article. So after all of this fraud, of which they've largely been aware for the last 5 or 6 years, right? Because media was reporting on it. Tim Walz only appoints an integrity director in December 2025. He appoints a third-party auditor to, go over Medicare fraud in the state. Who's that third-party auditor? Now, I again, there are sometimes people will ask questions, they're not really asking questions, and you have to be honest when that's what you're doing. I'm asking the question now, legit, because I think I have a rough idea as to how the Medicaid, Medicare, whatever the system is in Minnesota. I have a rough idea how it works, but I don't know exactly how it works. Now, when I saw who Tim Walz appointed for the third-party auditor, I had some questions because they don't really seem like a third party. So this is from the article. Look at his stupid face, like a dumb puppy dog who's too dumb to know how dumb he is, and yet is in charge of billions and billions of dollars. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz listens during a hearing in the White House oversight and killing. Okay. The spokesperson added that Walz has hired an outside firm to audit payments to high-risk programs. I had to go at, Grok is unreliable, but for basic matters of fact, it's it'll typically give you the answer, but double check it anyhow. Apparently, did Walz hire Optum for audit? Let me just make sure that he did here. See, this is why you double check, as I did, and at least you can rely on sometimes Grok for some things. Optum, specifically Optum State Government Solutions, a subsidiary of United Health Group, is the outside firm contracted by the Minnesota Department of Health, Human Services under Governor Tim Walz to conduct a third-party audit of billing and payment in 14 high-risk Medicaid programs vulnerable to fraud. This was initiated in October 2025, so they've known about the fraud for 6 years. They've had trials. People have gone to jail. Now, that was childcare fraud. That was feed the kids fraud. They've known about this fraud for damn near more than this, probably 5-6 years. And it's not until October 2025 that they hire an outside third-party audit firm to be determined. We're going to get into that. And it's only in December 2025 that they hire some oversight dude, whoever the hell he is. This was initiated in October 2025 with payments paused during reviews to flag irregularities and prevent improper distributions. This is the Grok answer. Separately, the administration partnered with Waypoint, a White Bear Lake-based firm. Law enforcement yet develop statewide fraud prevention toolkit. After the tens of billions is already gone, then we'll implement a toolkit. Useless twats is what they are. Now I have to see, how does the Minnesota Medicaid system work? State pays MCOs like United Healthcare before its exclusion in 2025 a fixed capitation rate, so per capita, head rate, per enrolled member per month, regardless of actual services provided or claims paid. MCOs then use those funds to pay providers for services rendered to their enrollees. This is a full risk model. MCOs, the MCO stands for medical. Oh, geez, what does it stand for? What did I forget the MCO stands for? MCOs bear the financial risk to provider payments, including any fraudulent claims they approve and pay. If an MCO pays a fraudulent claim, the loss stays with the MCO. The state does not provide additional reimbursement or adjust capitation rates retroactively for individual fraudulent payments. Why MCOs have incentive to detect fraud? Fraudulent claims reduce the MCO's profits. True, unless their government subsidies are per capitation rate, and in which case, the question I'm asking is, does United Health get any sort of subsidy from the government based on their capitation rate, their enrollment? And if they do that, then they might have an incentive to not go after fraud, even if it cuts into their bottom line, because their subsidies are based on a number of enrollees, regardless of whether or not they are real. That's the question I'm asking, and I don't know the answer to it right now. And I am actually hoping that the aggregate wisdom of the internets and our locals community, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, can help me discover the answer to this question. So that's what's going on with the third party. And I say, is this really a third party? Because it's a subsidiary of United Health who may or may not have a vested interest to actually partake in the fraud. Link. Enjoy it. That's not the link. This is the link. And you hire a Optum, a subsidiary of United Health. And if United has any incentive to pad its numbers, to allow fraudulent enrollees in their per capitation, based on which they get subsidies either from the state or federal, they're not third parties. They might be parties to the fraud. And you're hiring them now as an auditor to go and audit the fraud that they might be beneficiaries of. So my thought process, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. This is the question I'm asking. What benefits, subsidies from the state or federal, does United Health get? If they get subsidies based on number of enrollment, it's true that if they pay out fraudulent claims, services that were never provided, claims that don't exist, it'll cut into their profits. But if their subsidies are dependent upon the number of people enrolled, they have an interest, as my question would be, do they have an interest in maintaining potentially fraudulent enrollee lists that inflate the number so they get more subsidies per person enrolled, per capitation? And I don't know the answer to that question. I just know that Tim Tampon No Balls Walz is a fraud. He's either woefully stupid to this level of fraud, or he's a participant in it. In which case, I know his decisions are either stupid and therefore questionable, or corrupt and therefore questionable. So he appoints this third-party Optum, a subsidiary of United Health. And my question is, are they in fact an independent third party? And does United Health have anything potentially to conceal, potentially, in this rampant, widespread Medicare, Medicaid fraud? I don't know the answer to the question. And, just as we say in French, trop fort casse pas, you make sure of the information even when Grok gives it to you. When is this from? December 12th, 2025, 2 weeks ago. Governor Walz announces Tim O'Malley to serve as Director of Program Integrity. 5-6 years after the fraud was disclosed, discovered, reported by legacy media. 2 years after trials in 2024 for the food fraud. Minnesota Tim Walz announced Tim O'Malley will join the state as Director of Program Integrity. What does the government do when they get caught being involved in rampant, egregious, borderline criminal, if not outright criminal fraud? Well, they just, gotta have an oversight committee. Gotta hire another person to pay him to look into our fraud. We'll investigate ourselves and say, oh, yes, just terrible. We'll implement a new protocol so that it never happens again. Shame on you, Tim. What's his face? Okay, a judge, former superintendent, Minnesota Bureau, former FBI agent, reformer in the Archdiocese. O'Malley will work across state government to strengthen fraud prevention and protect taxpayer dollars. Too little, too late, Walz. Governor Walz also announced a state partnership with a third party, experts at Waypoints, to implement a statewide fraud program. And we go into their kissing themselves on the ass. Oh, sorry, patting themselves on the ass. That was O'Malley. And then we had the third party audit program. This is from October. Governor orders pause on all payments for 14 DHS Medicaid services until audit is complete. Governor Tim Walz announced that he's ordered a third-party audit of billing for 14 high-risk Medicaid. All right. Who's the name of it? Using funding passed during 2025 legislation, the Department of Human Services has contracted with Optum, which will analyze Medicaid fee-for-service claims data and flag potential issues for DHS review. Optimum's analytics will identify irregularities such as missing documentation, unusually high billing, and inconsistencies. So I'm not going to rely on the internet by any means. I am going to go to our vivabarneslaw.locals.com community and see what the posts have been in response to that. But I am going to determine whether or not I believe there might be fraud, potential risk for fraud that United Health might be involved in which case having their subsidiaries look into fraud that might encompass their, what's the opposite of subsidiary? Mother company. You didn't hire a third-party contractor to investigate fraud. You hired someone who might be complicit in it to cover it up.